International Quilt Market, 20 years of quilt expos in Europe, and many other. Carrie's house out in LaGrange, and we just had a really good time researching this book and thinking back. And so the book is a journey. It covers the establishment of Quilts Inc. And when this festival first began, but it actually has a whole lot more, and it's a biography of these two very formidable women and everything that they have accomplished.
So listen, it goes. Once you have to go up places on your rear end, you are no longer formidable.
They are formidable, yes. And they've truly changed the course of quilt history, and that's what I tried to write about in the book, was the festival founding in the early days and how so many women came on this journey with them and brought this missionary zeal to quilting. And one of the things that people told me, I interviewed a lot of people outside of Carrie Nancy, but in the business and quilters who had won awards and businesses, and just interviewed a lot of people. And I heard over and over about the outstanding exhibits at Quilts Inc. And so many people said nobody hangs a quilt like Quilt Festival. So yeah, I mean, just truly the exhibits. So maybe you guys want to exhibits.
Tell them about the first time that you hung quilts, which was at your quilt shop at Great Expectations. It was
true, but I remember you bought several of those quilts.
I did. I went into debt.
That's right. My husband I had a long, narrow store that was a former pet store. It smelled to high heaven. And so I found this thing called 2 Drops Deodorize a Skunk. And I went through 10 bitty ad in a local paper in a little town. And they would go in and they'd have money in one pocket. And so they would buy and sell quilts. And they did everything right there. And
National Quilt Festival, and sets this event apart from so many others, is the education component.
Yes.
And it's really the equivalent of running a community college for 5 or 6 days. It's an enormous amount of educational classes, over 5,000 students, 500 classes, 150 teachers. So if you can imagine, it's like running a small college. But you guys said education was the key from the very beginning. So maybe talk a little bit.
You have to look at who we are, okay? My Aunt Helen, her mother was a teacher. You know, we had it, Nancy, you never taught.
Thank goodness.
I don't
think I could have survived.
We kept bringing in new teachers that people didn't know, and they learned
here. And we have now surpassed 5,200 enrollees in our education department, and we still have the rest of today and tomorrow to go. So it's going to be a record, definitely. Wow. My mother was also
sat us down at the head of the bed. The quilt had been strapped to take real pretty little stitches here, because you're going to wake up every morning of your life and have to look at them.
Now, that does not look like a bride. And so she and a couple of great aunts made me another quilt, which was a Dresden plate, much better colors for a bride.
These ladies were at the forefront of women in business in the early 1970s, and people don't really realize how difficult it was for women-owned businesses.
Women prevail. It's wonderful. All right, when my daddy died in 1954, Mother had to, so Nancy's daddy co-signed for my mother to buy in October of 1974. And finally, I had the great good sense to go across the street.
Yep.
That's Teresa.
We decided 3 years ago when
the astronaut Karen Nyberg,
yes,
that was
right.
here a few years ago, and she was in the internet.
We're so beautiful, and I bet that's not the only people. Well, of course it's our way.
Have a favorite show out of all the 45 years, which is of course.
This is always our favorite show. Although I will tell you,
I have to say, I was just sure that these blue quilts.
I would like, I'd like a vote. Thank you kindly. Had already been turned down. So, you know, you want to tell about that?
Well, all you have to do is be your sweets.
Categories, and how do you decide how many quilts per category and then choose among those?
To festival. George Bush was running for president, and the following year he was supposed to be having his convention or something that would have been the same time. And I run the largest convention in Houston. No worries, gals.
A way that the president can ask us to move. We have a contract. And I said, and you know, there's another thing. Quilters are very
Experience of taking on the Smithsonian on behalf of quilt makers from the past and into the future.
What a nice. That was a very interesting time. I cannot say it was a nice time. I can tell you it was an interesting time. They were being imported back into the United States for prices like $50 and $75.
And they each had a certificate that said they were a true artifact from the Smithsonian.
And who wrote just the most moving letters you could imagine to the government that what had happened to